We like to think of farming as something old, peaceful, and harmless. A field, a seed, some rain, and a harvest. That image still survives because it is comforting. It suggests that food is natural by default, that the earth knows what it is doing, and that human beings are only borrowing from a system bigger than themselves. But modern farming has become something very different. It is not simply the act of growing food, it is the industrial management of life. It is the attempt to force nature into obedience with chemicals, deadlines, and profit margins. And once you begin forcing life instead of cooperating with it, the damage does not stay in the soil. It travels upward. It enters the plant. It enters the body. It enters the mind. What looks like efficiency on paper can become a slow collapse in reality. The problem is that collapse rarely arrives with a dramatic announcement. It comes quietly. First, the soil loses its depth. Then the crop loses its strength. Then the food loses its density. Then the human body loses something it was supposed to receive, but no longer gets in full. People call this progress because the fields still look green. They do not ask what kind of green it is. They do not ask what was removed to produce that color. They do not ask what the land had to give up in order to look productive. And that is where the lie begins. When appearance becomes the main measure of success, health becomes invisible long before sickness becomes obvious. The deeper tragedy is that chemical farming does not just alter food, it alters the relationship between life and its own support system. Healthy soil is not dirt, it is a living intelligence. It holds minerals, microbes, fungi, bacteria, and the memory of seasons. It acts like a hidden foundation beneath everything we eat. But once that foundation is treated like an empty surface, the whole structure changes. Crops begin to depend on synthetic correction. We feed plants in a way that makes them look alive without making them fully nourished. We produce abundance without resilience. We produce yield without wisdom. We produce food that can fill a stomach while starving the deeper systems that keep a human being stable. That is why so many people feel as though they are eating constantly, but still not being restored. The body knows when something is missing, even if the label says healthy. It knows when food has been pushed through a damaged chain. It knows when a diet is full of calories, but poor in meaning. And modern life has made this worse by disconnecting us from the source of what we consume. Most people do not know where their food came from, what the soil was like, what was sprayed on it, how long it traveled, or what it lost on the way. They see the product, not the system. They see the package, not the erosion. They see nutrition as a personal responsibility, while ignoring the industrial reality that shaped the entire plate before it ever reached the table. That is how a civilization gets sick, in a way that feels personal but is actually environmental. And the sickness does not stop at the body. It moves into temperament, attention, and emotional life. A generation raised on stripped-down food, overstimulated media, and constant chemical exposure does not experience the world in the same way as a generation that grew up close to land, season, and restraint. When the body is underfed in subtle ways, the mind becomes unstable in subtle ways. People become more anxious, more reactive, more exhausted, and more detached from their own internal signals. They call it stress. They call it burnout. They call it attention problems. They call it mood disorders, fatigue, brain fog, sensitivity, and inflammation. Some of those labels are useful, but they still describe the surface. The deeper question is why so many human systems are falling apart together. Why are digestion, immunity, cognition, and emotional stability all weakening in the same era? Why do so many people feel disconnected from their own bodies while living in a world that claims to be more advanced than ever? Part of the answer is that we have replaced living systems with managed systems. We no longer trust nature to feed us, so we industrialize it. Then we no longer trust the body to handle the results, so we medicate the outcome. Then we no longer trust the mind to make sense of it, so we distract it. That sequence creates a society that looks functional from far away and increasingly broken up close. People are not simply getting sick, they are being conditioned to adapt to decline as if decline were normal. That is what makes chemical farming so dangerous. It does not announce itself as an enemy, it arrives as convenience. It arrives as higher output, It arrives as cheaper food. It arrives as a solution, but a solution that weakens the land, weakens the crop, weakens the body, and weakens the mind is not a solution. It is a bargain with delayed consequences. What we are really looking at is a crisis of separation. We separated food from soil, then we separated health from food, then we separated disease from environment, then we separated the human being from the conditions that made human life stable in the first place. Once that split becomes normal, people start looking for the wrong cause. They blame genetics when the environment has been poisoned. They blame individual weakness when the support system has been broken. They blame personal choice when the field itself has been degraded. And because the consequences are spread out over time, the system survives by making the damage feel unrelated. A child becomes sick, and nobody connects it to the chain that fed them. An adult becomes exhausted, and nobody connects it to the long decline of what their food had become. A community becomes more fragmented, and nobody connects it to the physical instability running through the body of the culture itself. But culture is biological in more ways than people admit. When the body is under pressure, the mind changes. When the mind changes, relationships change. When relationships change, civilization changes. So the real loss is not just human health, it is trust in the natural order that once held everything together. Recovery will not come from pretending the modern system is harmless. It will come from telling the truth about what was traded away. Health cannot be separated from soil forever. The body cannot be separated from food forever. And human consciousness cannot be separated from the condition of the world forever. At some point, the bill arrives. The only question is whether people keep paying it blindly or whether they wake up in time to build something cleaner, slower, and more alive. There is another layer to this problem that most people never want to face. Chemical farming does not only weaken food, it normalizes a relationship to life built on control rather than respect. Once that mindset takes hold, everything becomes a target for optimization. The land must be optimized. The crop must be optimized. The body must be optimized. The diet must be optimized. Even health becomes a performance metric instead of a living state. And when you live inside that mentality long enough, you stop asking whether the system is nourishing life. You only ask whether it is producing results fast enough. That is how a poisoned process keeps getting defended. It looks productive. It sounds rational. It fits the language of modern progress. But underneath all of that is a basic fact people keep avoiding. A system that depends on the exhaustion of soil will eventually produce the exhaustion of people. A system that strips vitality from the earth will not hand vitality to the human beings who eat from it. It will hand them a weaker biology, a more fragile immune system, a more unstable mood, and a deeper confusion about why everything feels harder than it should. In that sense, the crisis is not just agricultural, it is psychological. It teaches people to accept decline as normal. It teaches them to live with less energy, less clarity, less resilience, and less connection, while calling the whole thing advancement. And once that becomes the standard, a culture stops defending health and starts adapting to disease.